Your job as a screenwriter is to turn the audience into keen observers of detail, that you are going to give them clues. And when you give them the clue, you do it in such a way that they're going to anticipate where you're going.
I'd like to welcome to the show Paul Gulino. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing much better now that we've started live. This is great. Thank you. Thank you for the invite. Thanks for being part of my world.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I told you when we were off air, I always love bringing different voices and different ideas on the screenwriting process because you just never know what's going to connect with that individual screenwriter out there, where they might like one person or they might like the other person, or this book really talks to them or that idea really talks to them. So I always love to bring new ideas on. And when I read about your ideas and your approaches, I was like, well, I got to get Paul on the show. So I'm so glad.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're on. So first of all, how did you get started in the business?
I was started with a Super 8 camera when I was 10 years old. You know, Dad's Super 8 camera, and making a movie with our dog, the family dog, and then graduating to Super 8 sound, and then finding out one day that there was such a thing as film classes taught at universities, and I was like, really? And I studied with Frank Danielle at Columbia University. And as I said before, he's had a lot of very successful students. He was a unique teacher. His stable would include Milos Forman, would be recognizable. David Lynch was another one. Terrence Malick. Martin Brest was one of his students at the American Film Institute. He's on top of it. So there were a lot. He was the founding director of the American Film Institute, and he brought his pedagogy from Czechoslovakia to the United States through that. And in turn, his pedagogy came from studying American cinema in Czechoslovakia and basically watching movies over and over and over again, because you could do that for one price, sitting in the theater, and then applying Western dramatic theory to understanding how movies work. And then his approach to teaching was sort of like working with you as a collaborator on your script while smuggling theory in, so you have a broader picture of what your choices are, basically making you aware of what your choices are when you're telling a story. So so that's how I got my start. After I went to film school with Frank, I was doing the thing with writing, and I was in New York City, so I was working on stage plays and trying to get things released in front of an audience, and then moved to LA in '89, and then was able to get an agent, and he was able to sell a spec script, and got that made. I like to say the screenplay was loosely based on a real story, and the movie that resulted was loosely based on my screenplay. I had that, and had another film made a few years later, and I've been working as a consultant, worked on in feature animation on a project that did not get made, but it was a great experience. You know, it was one of these things where they spent $30 million on it and then decided. I was the sixth writer out of about 8 writing teams on the project.
Fair enough. So when you came to LA, though, it was during the whole spec boom time, isn't it? It was the time where spec scripts were like, everybody was making $1 million here, $2 million there. I mean, the whole Shane Black, Joe Esterhaus era of spec scripts was that time, right?
Yes, that was basically the 80s was the discovery that there's such a thing as writing a screenplay, and that you can that that's a viable option, and that Hollywood was open to those things.
Back then.
There have been periods when they were open, and then they weren't, and then they were. There was a boom in an interest in screenwriting, or what they called at the time photoplay writing, back in the 19-teens. So you look back there and you'll find I believe there's about 60 titles on how to write a photoplay. And the public was very interested in this. And there were manuals how to write a photoplay. And because they were taking from the outsiders at that time. And then you have this drought for many years because Hollywood became sort of a closed shop. It was the film school of that time. And then starting, for a variety of reasons, in the 70s, things fell apart and it opened up and the new voices were heard. And that's when screenwriting was sort of rediscovered. And then starting in 79, you have Sid Field's book come out. And then the boom in screenwriting books, pedagogy and interest in it begins there. And so when I was in film school, my frame of reference is very different because there were no manuals at the time. I was learning from a master teacher, and there were books on playwriting. Certainly, there were plenty of those, but it was something being rediscovered at the time. How do you put this stuff together?
So you've been teaching for many years now. So you've had a lot of students. You've probably read a handful of screenplays, just a handful, in the course of your time teaching. What is the biggest mistake you see first-time screenwriters make?
It's an interesting question because my perspective is a little strange in that I'll train them initially. So like they're not writing a feature script. Nobody hands me a feature script right away and has me assess it. They have to go through kind of like etudes. You know how musicians have scales, etc. Well, we have writing etudes. They're going to exercise different writing muscles, and then they build up to a feature. And then I'll start working with them on that. So the ones I've consulted on where I get a full length. Are you hearing a hammering somewhere?
Okay. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. We got sound engineers. They'll get rid of that. No. The ones that I see nowadays, what I tend to notice is that in a way they're overthought. Like they're so encrusted with all these different, they read a lot of books on it and they want to do it right. And I'll have stories that are promising, but I see they're jamming it into some idea, and then they're really proud of the fact that I have the second twist here. See, I got it here, and this is here. And so there's often a departure between a conflict between what their story is and how they're executing it. So, for example, I was working with someone working on a romantic comedy recently, and this person had a woman, main character, and she's going she's with the wrong guy, She's with the wrong guy, and the right guy is right out there. So, end of the second act, he's got this all is lost moment, or dark night of the soul. And that moment consisted of her finding out that the guy that she's with is all wrong for her. He's not only not right for her, but he's stealing, he's cheating, I don't know what, he's probably got, murdering puppies somewhere. It wasn't that bad, but it was like she makes this discovery. And why? Because you're supposed to have this happen at the end of the second act. And then I said, well, wait a minute. She doesn't belong with this guy. So maybe the end of the second act is she gets him. That's not what the audience wants. But it sounds like, from what your material, the worst possibility would be that she winds up with the wrong guy. So the worst thing that could happen is he proposes to her and she accepts it. Now we have a third act tension, which is going to be, is she going to realize in time before the wedding that the right guy is right there? You see, the landscape is, I like to say all truth in screenwriting is local. It always depends. Yes, you could have a desperate moment at the end of the second act, but it depends. It depends on what the terrain of the story is you're working on. And so I've run into that. I don't know how helpful that is. The other thing I notice that I have to work with students on is dialogue. And the mistake that they make, and it's certainly a mistake I made, and it's a mistake that people starting out make. And I can see that it's not about overall feature screenplays. It happens in short films, so I can tell you what they come with. Is what I call Q&A dialogue, question and answer dialogue. It's a character enters the room and says, "How are you today?" And the person says, not bad. I didn't sleep much last night. How about you? Well, I slept pretty well, but I'm thinking of going to the store. Would you like to go to the store? I think I might go to the store, but that's where one person questions, the other one answers, and it's emotionally neutral. So we I work with them on how to overcome that problem, how to understand how characters interact and how you can avoid that sort of behavior in your scripts and then make them readable. So that's a mistake that I see, and that's what people do. It takes a while.
I realized when I was first writing screenplays, I'm by no stretch a master screenwriter by any stretch, but when I first started writing, I did everything. A lot of the things that you were saying right there, I did because I read so many books and I read so much technique that I was like, on page this has to happen on this line. So I would like jam it in there, regardless if it meant it was correct or not correct. And I would literally conform the story around absolutely having to hit this specific point. And I found it, and from my own experience, that it is just, it's insecurity. It's an insecurity of not feeling comfortable with the craft enough to be able to just let me do what I need to do to tell the story. Like, with these master screenwriters out there, even master filmmakers, that they just take their time and they don't have to hit certain things. Yes, they're going to hit probably the 3-act structure or something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I think has a 5-act structure, if I'm not mistaken. Those kind of things, they'll hit those points in good time, and as long as it works within the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's to me, it's because I was trained before a lot of theories came out, other than Aristotle and
poetics, of course.
Some other more traditional drama. The way I was trained, you look at what's the function, and what Danielle, from the very first meeting, first class, it's about connection as opposed to expression. Take a step back and ask yourself, when you go to a film school, when you take a writing class, what is it you're actually learning? You're not learning how to be creative. That's not something that can really be taught that we know of yet. Mm-hmm. And you can create circumstances by which people can maybe be more creative, but it's not well understood, and it's hard to model with computers, to get computers to be creative. So we don't do that. We don't teach you the creative process. What we do teach you, though, what we have learned a lot about over the last several thousand years, is we've learned about audiences. And we can, if you know that your job is to connect with an audience, we can teach you about audiences. And I don't mean like a particular demographic. I mean a general person, a normal human being. How do people respond to material? And so when you think about how a story is structured, say, and that's a term that's used a lot. By structure, I guess I would mean the arrangement of the pieces. Mm-hmm. The pieces being the scenes and information. You can see that strategy, 3 acts, 5 acts, whatever, as a kind of a subset of the bigger question of how do I grab them and how do I keep them? How do you grab an audience and how do you keep that audience? And if you know if you have the tools to do that, you can use it in a variety of very exciting, interesting ways, and you can pivot between a feature film and a stage play and a series, streaming series, because you know how that's done. You know how to get in people's heads. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about this, and why I wrote that second book with Connie Shears, a psychology professor. It's how do films get into people's heads? And how can you teach people how to get into people's heads and manipulate them? And one of the things I like to do when I'm lecturing is I'll show them like a short film that I like a 4-minute movie, and then I'll stop it like with about 30 seconds left in it and say, sorry, we got to move on. I'm sorry. And this movie has achieved something, it's got them wondering what's happening next. And when I do that, you hear the groans, and I say, "What's wrong? Hey, I showed you most of the movie. Why do you have to see the rest?" And I just showed these images up here and sound, and it went out into that audience, and it worked them over, and it manipulated them, and now they're pissed because they want to see the end of this, and that's like amazing. And I love that fact, and I love learning how to do that, and then teaching people how that can be done. And so when we talk about 3-act structure, or do you need it or do you not need it, it's about how you define acts. And if you define them by function, what is the function of the act? Well, if the function is to create what we call dramatic tension, which is will the boy get the girl or the boy get the boy? Let's not genderize this. We're in the modern age. Will the LGBTQ person get the one that they like?
Yes.
Will that person get that person? Okay, that's the question. Okay, and if we connect with the character, we're going to be tilted into the future. We're going to be wondering whether they're going to get that person, and then so you wind up in drama. It's called the main dramatic question. Okay, will the person get the other person? And the question has 3 parts. You pose it, you deliberate, and you answer. You don't need more, and you can't have less. And so if you want to do dramatic tension as your main tool for keeping the audience interested in your movie, you don't have a choice. I mean, if the audience is watching something and they don't know why the character is doing what they're doing, then they're not going to be in suspense about whether they're going to get what they want. It's not going to work. So therefore, you need to pose that question in the audience's mind. And then the 3rd act is you answer the question. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
So because you wrote this book, which is called The Neuroscience of Screenwriting, which is amazing. It's amazing. I love studying neuroscience. It's a hobby of mine, as crazy as that sounds. I love studying neuroscience. Yeah. And I want to ask you, what is it about the human mind that example that you shared in your class when you cut them off? What is it in our brains that is this need to know what happens? This absolute, because you go on the ride, and a good story, a good movie, a good book will take you down this road. And if someone ruins the ending that's the worst. If you get a spoiler out, or you ruin the movie for them before they ever get to watch it, or ruin the book or anything like that, there is anger. There is like pure anger. What is it on a neuroscience level? What are the connections? What are the synapses in your mind that are connected? I mean, is this just programming over thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of telling stories around the campfire, where now we're just, if we don't hear the end of that story, we could die? Because that was the originally the story was like, there was a tiger who ate the child. And if you go around this corner, what corner are we to go around? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't tell you the corner. And now you're dead. So I don't know. Is that something? I'm just throwing that out out there. What do you think?
Well, there's one theory which is a little bit experiment. It hasn't been confirmed yet, so we didn't actually put it in the book. But there's a theory of mirror neurons that Connie talked about. That this idea that when you watch somebody eat a chocolate pie, the very same neurons that are happening in their brain, if you like chocolate, are firing in yours, so you connect with it in that way.
Well, that's advertising. That's basically advertising.
Yeah. Right. And I, by the way, I make a great chocolate meringue pie. So just I have to pick that choice because it's important to me. But that's one theory, but it hasn't been confirmed. But the best argument that I've heard about, why do we read stories? Why do we watch stories? It's because it's universal. You kind of look for what's the adaptation in evolution. Because in evolution, in human existence, in any kind of life form, any activity takes energy. And you're going to have to eat or consume things in order to have enough energy to do that thing. And you don't want to waste energy. You could starve, or it's not efficient. If you could spend your time hunting rather than doing something else, you're wasting your time and you're reducing your chance for survival. Well, Stories must play some role in survival. And a good argument comes, there's a book called The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. And his argument is this, that we mentioned in the book, it's that it's like learning. It's a way of learning about life without being in danger. That it's a rehearsal for life. And it is a learning thing. You like you just said, you tell a story about this tiger that's over there, and you don't tell people what's the lesson learned, then it's frustrating. And this process by which we become involved in the storytelling, there's other theories about that. It has to do with how we, in terms of connecting with main characters, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we give it art? Well, there's a process by which some would argue that morals in society are created, which is one theory is called blurring. That you'll blur and become another person. Like the example the theorist gave was this lady is thinking of killing her neighbor. Okay, and then before she does it, she imagines what it would be like to be that neighbor, and then for a moment she imagines the pain that she would cause by doing that, and then they blur, their identities blur, and then she decides as a result, I better not do it because I don't want them to feel the pain that I would feel. Okay, so that's a theory of how we connect with people, and that's deployed by storytellers when we tell a story. When we connect with a person on screen, we literally lose ourselves. I mean, I know you've had this experience.
Of course,
you're watching a movie. I've been in a movie theater where the power went out. Like, whoa, where am I? I'm in a movie theater. It's noon. I thought it was nighttime because the movie, you get lost in it.
It's very it is such a magical thing. It really, when it's a good story and a good movie or a good book, you're not there. You are in the story. You are. Right. Everything else just shuts down because we're literally sitting in a dark room for 2 hours looking at some images flicker and some sound play. It's fairly a magical experience in the movie theater, but anyway.
Right, and there's this thing called the willing suspension of disbelief, that you're willing to do that. Okay, well, Gottschall argues that it's not willing. You can't help it. If I start telling a story, okay, there was this ship on the sea, and the sea salt was blowing, and the waves were coming in, and the clouds appeared on the horizon, and you're there already. You can't stop feeling those things and hearing and imagining what I'm telling you.
Is it the equivalent of saying, "Don't think of the pink elephant"?
It could be.
It's basically whatever you do, don't think of a pink elephant right now. And you can't stop it. Now everyone who's listening right now is thinking of a pink elephant. Even I told them don't think about it. So very simple. When you were telling that story, I was already going in my head and connecting to the experiences of when I was on a sea on a boat, or when I was on and I could smell the ocean. I was already going real quick, and I wasn't even exerting any energy to do it.
Yeah, it comes natural to us because it helps us. Another psychologist, I want to make sure I get the name, Keith Oatley, because I referenced this. He had an article called the Flight Simulator of Life, that stories are the equivalent of a flight simulator. For an airline pilot, you're on a flight simulator, so when you crash, you don't die. A movie, you become that other person in the movie, in the story, in the film, in the TV series, and they go through all kinds of danger and they learn lessons. And guess what? You got to learn the lesson that they learned, but you didn't have to die in the end. You got to learn it. So even a tragedy where the character doesn't survive, you learn something. You've learned, don't do that.
Now, isn't it interesting, because as of this recording, The Joker came out in theaters last week, and it is causing all sorts of commotion. People are walking out of the theater. People are loving the movie. It is a very divisive film. Right. Because, and I haven't seen it yet. I have my tickets because I have kids. I haven't either. So I want to see it too. But the thing, which I bring it up for this conversation, is that you are following a villain. You're watching a person go from being maybe a damaged human being into a full-blown villain, arguably a psychotic maniac, who is arguably one of the greatest villains ever created in the scope of movies and possibly in comic book lore as well. So people have a problem with that because you're now attaching yourself to a villain in such a deep, dark way that it is bothering people. And I can't remember a movie. I mean, Taxi Driver would probably be the closest thing. Like when you watch Taxi Driver, there's a lot of people who just can't deal with it because you're Travis Bickle. I mean, you're with him.
That guy doing it.
You're in there. Yeah. There is nothing else you can attach yourself to. And the filmmaker and the storyteller and the screenwriter, you're Travis, and you're going through it, and he's who he is. So people, that's why films like that have such a divisive feeling to it. And in today's world, you don't get those kind of films. So I'm excited to watch The Joker. I mean, it's put out by a studio.
That'll be very interesting. Usually, like, there have been successful movies, and one word I discourage my students from using that's popular is when they talk about the main character is hero. And I understand, like, the hero's journey, they don't necessarily mean hero, but when you say someone's a hero, you gotta the impression you get, the connotation is, oh, someone who's heroic. They do heroic things, and they're strong, and they're attractive, and all that. But we don't learn from those kinds of people. We learn from people who got problems and that transgress, and they do the wrong thing. But you can have a character who's let's say a man who has an affair with a married woman and decides to murder her husband so he can get money, and we'll go with it because double indemnity, that works. But there is enough there for us to connect with, so that we're okay with going for the ride, even though it was controversial at the time.
Yeah,
and there was questions about, I mean, it couldn't get made for a long time. And there was this sense that people do learn from movies, and therefore we can't have bad people as main characters unless they're really punished. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but they wrote and shot an extra sequence in that movie that they cut out. And that extra sequence was, do you remember the film very clearly at all?
Not very clear. I saw it years ago, probably at film school.
Years ago, okay. Well, the last scene is, spoiler alert, but it doesn't matter. It's still, he'll tell you anyway.
If it's over 50, 60 years old, it's not a spoiler alert anymore. It's on
not
them.
A spoiler. That's right. So I can't get sued. It's a statute of limitations.
Exactly.
So this, what happens at the end is it's wrapped around with it begins with a flashback. It begins in the present, and the whole thing is a flashback with the guy narrating. And in the end, he stumbles and falls in the office, and that's where it ends. And he's with his buddy who suspected him and had to ultimately turn him in. But that's where they ended it. But the next sequence that they didn't shoot involved Fred McMurray's execution. He goes to the electric chair.
Wow.
And it was an expensive, elaborate sequence. And Keyes, his best friend, is sitting in the audience, watching his best friend being put to death for his crime. And they realized it was a little too much. So they cut that out. But you could see how conscious they were, making sure that we don't connect with, we don't learn that it's okay to kill people from this movie. Another picture that I like to cite is one that's the main character committed statutory rape and is in jail for fighting, fist fighting, and people having assaults, and also he's a lazy bum and doesn't want to do any work. That's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's McMurphy.
What a great movie. Oh, what a great movie.
Yeah. But so you've got this flawed character in his own way. In the way his tragic flaw is a good thing. He has humanity. That's how the movies really twist things around. But our first impression of him is, and that's something called the primacy effect, first impression. The first time you see him, he's he's whooping it up for joy, and then he's going around trying to talk to people and helping them with play cards. So your first impression is he's a good guy, and then you learn a little bit more about him, and then you find out what the kind of person he is, but his behavior is at odds with that. So I don't like students to censor themselves from having interesting, flawed characters. Now, the Joker I haven't seen. The reason for diverse opinions is something else that we talk a little bit about in the book. It just has to do with, of course, what we bring to movies, and we do bring our life experiences to them. We have, right, and so different movies are going to affect people in different ways. And I tell my students, when I pick movies that I show, that I analyze, that it's I should pick them for three reasons. One is I have to feel that they work, because I can't show you a movie how it works if I don't think it works. The second is it has to be rich in the craftsmanship, so I can point out different things the writer and the storytellers are doing that they can learn. And the third thing I tell them is the luck of the draw. I gotta love it, and that's just me. And if they're out of luck, because the guy in the next room, he's going to show a different set of movies, and that just has to do with what resonates with me in particular. And there is a concept in constructivist psychology called the schema. A schema is a conceptual framework by which we understand the world. It's a shorthand way of understanding things. It kind of borders with object recognition, but it's like constructivist psychology, which plays a role in how we understand movies, and which I think if you understand that, you can have fun, is the premise of that. The argument is that our experience of the world, our experience of life, is not largely knowledge-based. It's based on inference, because our brains aren't powerful enough to process everything that we're seeing all around us.
No, of course.
Right. So an example would be if you see a curb on a street, a curb. The first time you're going to look at it, you're going to check it out when you're 2 or something, and you're going to navigate it. But once you store it, that's called bottom-up processing. You see it, it goes up in your brain. Then after that, it becomes top-down processing, where you see a curb, you compare it to your memory of how curbs work, and then you assume it's like any other curb, so you just walk over it. You don't measure it each time you walk over it. That wouldn't be efficient. So we have those shortcuts. And what happens is that sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes that curb isn't what we thought it was. It's a different curb, so we stumble, we fall. So when we'll get back to that in a second, how that plays a role in screenwriting. But in terms of how we perceive things, we do bring that top-down processing to the world, because we've all had slightly different experiences. So that, going back to Cuckoo's Nest, there's a scene in which Nurse Ratched, the first time she does this group therapy, and it's terrible. It's just everybody's at each other's throats, and she's sitting there impassively at the end, okay? And I stopped it there, and I asked my students, what do you think's going on with her? And I got different reactions.
Different
it was based on their perception. One said that she was a sadist, and she's happy that they fell apart. Another one said that she felt that this person had regret, that they weren't healthier. Another one was, there was a variety of these things. And no one's right. It's just they're bringing their stuff. So the Joker will be an interesting one to look at, what we identify with.
I always tell people that from my studies in neuroscience, that many of the things that stop us from specifically being like screenwriters or being artists in general is by the associations of things that happened to us in the past, where you either associate failure and your brain tells you're basically, the brain needs to keep you in this nice safe box. You're in a safe zone. That safe zone is where you go, and you'll only go up to the edge of that safe zone, because outside of that zone is unknown, and whatever's unknown is potentially deadly, because that's how our alligator brain, a reptilian part of our brain works. So that's why it's so difficult for people to lose weight, because their safe zone is being where they're at. Or I can't write a screenplay. I'm just going to do a short first. And then they slowly build up the courage to I'm going to do a screenplay. And if it's not really good, or if someone beats them down and they're not prepared for it, they're like, okay, I'm going to go back. It's kind of like you're always stepping in and you're always trying to we're built to be comfortable and in a comfort zone. And I always tell people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's the only way you grow. That's the only way you get out there and do things. And that works with writing as well, because I know as well as you do, there's many screenwriters out there who live in their box, and they do their box well, and they don't generally jump out of their genre, their style. That's why I love people like, Tarantino, who stays within his box, but man, he's jumped into every genre possible, and just throws his flavor into every genre. Same thing with Kubrick. When Kubrick was doing his masterpieces, I mean, he literally made the definitive film of every genre that he walked into.
Right.
Essentially. So I wanted to get your opinion in regards to the neuroscience behind that, and the how it affects us as screenwriters and as creatives.
Well, I'm certainly not a neuroscientist, so I won't
Fair enough.
presume to go there.
Neither am I. But from educated guests,
I have several patients I'm going to be operating on later today, because everybody's got to make a little money on the side, and you take a lot. I gotta say.
Yeah, neuroscience is a nice side hustle.
Yeah. Oh, and you could do a series with those, man, of multiple surgeries for the same issue. No, but it is true what that are talk about the reptilian brain. Our two most basic impulses are hope and fear. Emotions are hope and fear. Okay, and fear is actually what you're describing. Stay in the safe box. Fear is actually stronger than hope. And the example that I heard from one psychology professor was that if you are in a restaurant and you get this, a fancy restaurant with a wonderful seafood plate, with all the fixings and everything, and you're about to eat it and you see a cockroach in it. That's it. You're done. Okay. You're not going there. You're not going to touch it. Contrast that. Suppose you sit down to a meal and it's covered with roaches, and you see one, artichoke. You're not going to say, "Yeah, look at that. I got an artichoke out of this." You don't touch it. So that's the example they gave of this hope and fear. Now, something else that's useful that we didn't talk about in this book, but it's another thing that I think is useful for when writers work with characters, is this narrative theory of psychological development. Because you're talking about people that stay in the box. Tarantino is different. That the idea is that we, up till by the time we get to age 3, we have developed a narrative of our lives. And we tend to notice the things that confirm that narrative and ignore the facts that don't. And this leads to all kinds of neuroses. I mean, it's like, I'm the one who never was loved, so I'm unlovable. Okay, someone throws himself at you, that's an aberration. Doesn't fit, And there was this episode of a senator, I forget his name, a U.S. senator a few years ago, who was caught having sex with men in bathrooms in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Okay,
something like that,
right.
yeah.
Okay, so what was his story? Well, he was married and he had kids, and he's a straight man, right? Well, that's the story he tells himself. The fact that he's meeting strange men and having sex with them gets ignored in that narrative. It's like, oh, I don't know what that is, but that has nothing to do with who I am. What I am is a straight man with a family and all that. And in a way, this guy's living two different lives. One he's aware of and one that he's blocked out. I can't speak to him. He's not my patient. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. But you can see that process happening, that it's possible that a guy who's spent 50 years of his life, he's like 50 years of his life suppressing some reality and constructed a reality in which he was not gay. If he ever came at age 65 to realization that he was gay, that's 50 years of your life that you're a stranger.
It's devastating. It's devastating.
Yeah. We should put that away.
So let's turn this into something for screenwriters in regards to the screenwriting guys who's listening. No, because listen, I could talk neuroscience all day, but the concept for character development, this is so powerful, and it's such a powerful tool to use as a screenwriter to get into psychology and to get into almost just the concept of what we just talked about, adding that sub layer, that thing underneath it, that underlining thing of like, I have to stay in this safe box. Perfect example, a guy who's been, 50 years saying, I'm married, I have kids, but then I go off. I mean, that's, and exploring why he did that. That's a story. That's a screenplay. Or the person who has a wife and kids and he's a serial killer, on the side. And we've seen those kind of movies. Like they literally compartmentalize. I can't say the word. You know what I'm saying?
Compartmentalize.
Thank you, sir.
Let me help you out there a little bit. Okay.
But they put their worlds in different boxes as almost a defense mechanism for themselves. So someone like this, the guy you're talking about, this politician, he literally was doing this to protect himself in his mind. Like that's that other story, right, which is his true nature. He couldn't, for whatever reason, the way he was raised, his environment, his social group or community wouldn't accept that. So he suppressed it. And now it comes out in this very strange way years later, because you can't hold something like that in. It's not something you can maybe hold it at bay for decades, but eventually it will come out. That is such a powerful character development tool.
The dissonance between the story you tell yourself about yourself and the reality, when that collapses, that's huge. And the way you can use it in screenwriting, a lot of people like, I think, creating characters, it is kind of a mysterious process. People come up with them. Some people are very good at it. Some have more plot-driven or that kind of thing. They divide it that way. Stories and characters are more primitive. But usually people try to write a background about their character. Okay, he was raised this, he did this. And that's useful to generate ideas. But the other thing to think about is not what they went through, but what do they tell themselves about what they went through? What is it? Because this is really important when you're writing a screenplay, when you're even plotting it out. The character doesn't know what the story's about. They think it's about something completely other than what you're the journey you're going to put them on. So where is their head? Where is your character thinking things are going to go? What's the narrative that they're telling themselves while you're plotting, while you're God doing all kinds of things to their lives? So in that sense, to give a little thought to this question when you're thinking about coming up with a character, when you're trying to come up with the specifics of a character, what do they think about themselves? What's their image of themselves and their story, really their story of themselves? And we certainly do exist in story. We do that. So
it's a defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism for our own. Just for us to be able to continue. It's a story. Stories are so powerful that we tell ourselves stories just so we can make sense of this insane thing called life. And I think that's one of the powers of story. It is a way for art in general is a way for us to process just being alive and just generally. So we're always looking for something to just grab onto, and story is such a powerful thing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you some practical things for your students to how to apply this. That the first lesson of Frank Daniel, I have it in my notes from the first day of the first class, was that your job as a screenwriter is to turn the audience into keen observers of detail. That you are going to give them clues. And when you give them the clues, you do it in such a way that they're going to anticipate where you're going. And once you've got them anticipating where you're going, you got them. And you can do all kinds of things with that. And that idea was formalized. I studied with him in 79 to 82. Okay. In 1985, a theorist named David Bordwell actually took that idea. Now, he didn't get it from Frank Daniel. He did it himself. He came out with a book called Narration in the Fiction Film. And it's very influential in narratology, in the study of narrative in the academic world. And he applied constructivist psychology to how we comprehend movies. That, in other words, we're not sitting back and just absorbing. We're actively involved in anticipating. And that's how we go through life. I was telling you about how we assume things about the world. Well, I can give you clues. I can tell you a simple story now. And it's like this. Suppose I show you a movie. You're watching a movie, and in this movie, you have a man, and he goes to a flower shop, and he gets flowers, and he puts on the flowers, happy anniversary, and he gets a box of chocolate, okay? And he's heading home. Meanwhile, his wife gets up, she gets herself all attractive in negligee and all that, and at home. And then she gets out a gun, and she puts the gun in the drawer of the nightstand, okay? So where are we going with it? I just tell you that much. You got a pretty good idea that he's planning to make love and she's planning to make war, okay? That's how it's going to read. I can pretty much assume that. Now, there may be some people who think, well, I really have no idea what's going to happen. But I think most people are going to say, shit, he's in a lot of trouble, okay? So then he comes home and presents her with the flowers and chocolate. She reaches for the drawer, opens it up, and says, happy anniversary. And it turns out he's a gun collector. And this is the gun that he's been hoping for, and she's been saving for a year to get him this gun, okay? We have a twist. I just told two stories, the one you thought you were seeing and the one you're actually seeing, right? That's all a twist is. But I rely on giving you clues and assuming that the audience is going to put them together. Now, then she takes a piece of chocolate, she gets sick, and dies. And then it turns out he poisoned the chocolate, okay? There's another twist. Beautiful. I give you that information. I decide what information to give you and what to withhold. And that's one of the things that Danielle mentioned. He said there's really three questions when you're developing a story. When you're in the ideation stage and you're trying to figure it out on the outline stage of the beat sheet, the three questions are, of course, what does the main character want? What are they trying to avoid? Okay. The second is, what does the main character know? And what does the main character not know? And the third is, what does the audience know? And what does the audience not know? And based on those three things, that's going to determine how your story plays. And a story can be, it's a difference between the story and the telling of the story. Or in narratology terms, the narrative, which is the story, and the narration, which is the telling of it. Another example I could give you, there's this man, he's at the doctor, right? And he tells the doctor, I'm really worried about my wife. I think she's getting hard of hearing. Okay? But I'm afraid to bring it up with her because she's concerned about, maybe she'd be offended. She's getting older and all that, sensitive to it. Doctor says, very simple. Go home tonight, get a certain distance away, talk to her in your normal voice, and keep getting gradually closer until she can hear you. Right? And then you'll know if there's really a problem, because if there's no problem, you'll know. So he goes home, and she's over in the kitchen, and he's in the living room, the door's open, and he's sitting on the couch, and he just says in his normal voice, darling, what's for dinner? Nothing, okay? So he gets up, and he goes to the edge of the kitchen where the door is open. He says, normal voice, darling, what's for dinner? Nothing. So then he goes right into the kitchen, darling, what's for dinner? Nothing. So finally he gets right behind her and says, darling, what's for dinner? She says, for the fourth time, chicken. So it's like, all right, the story was a man is hard of hearing, but he thinks it's his wife who's hard of hearing. The doctor tells him to go home and do this test. He does the test and then discovers that it's actually he's the one who's hard of hearing. If I tell it that way, it's not going to go anywhere, right? But if I withhold certain information, I tell you the same story, but it plays differently. So that's one of the elements of constructivist psychology you can play with, and it's useful to realize too that audiences when they go to a movie, they don't see a story; they see scenes. Mm-hmm. They see the scenes and they construct the story based on the clues you give them in the scenes. That's all they ever see are scenes. They create the story in their minds. And knowing that, you realize you have this power that you can manipulate. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The master of this, of suspense, of course, is Mr. Hitchcock, which as you were saying the story, I was thinking of Psycho, which was a perfect example of that. He played on the audience knowledge of Janet Leigh as a big movie star. And they thought, and they went down this road with her, and they're like, well, obviously she's the movie star. Nothing is going to happen to her. And 20 minutes in, she's gone. Sorry, spoiler alert, guys. She gets killed in the shower scene.
60 years old.
Yeah, she gets killed in the shower scene. So now the audience has nobody to hold on to. And now they're handed over to this weird dude at the motel. And now he becomes the main character in the middle, which was completely revolutionary at the time. Yeah. And you know, Wes Craven did it again with Scream in a smaller way at the beginning of Scream as well. They do that, like just kill off but the thing is that they carried you along, and it was this whole narrative that he was talking about, like the money, and she was running, and then the cop pulls her over, and it was all BS. He was completely leading them down the wrong way. I'm like, no, we're just going to kill her, and now it's really about this. That's brilliant storytelling.
He played the audience, and I think that's a great example. I'm glad you brought it up. It's a great example about. I know you had another guest a while ago. Was it Carl Iglesias? I think he said he echoed what I think is that. If you think about rules, because you always here's the conversation I hear at the film school all the time. It's like this: we watch a student film and it's kind of underwhelming, and somebody says, not that our students always have great films.
Obviously, Paul.
Well, it's Chapman University, for God's sake.
I mean, come on.
But all right, yeah. So somebody will say, well, you know what? They really got to learn the rules of filmmaking, storytelling, and someone else will say, yeah, but you got to break the rules. And then someone else will say, but you got to learn the rules before you break the rules. And then somebody else will say, how about lunch? Let's go to lunch. How about that? It just goes, this conversation never goes anywhere. Or I'll hear someone say, well, he broke the rules, but it was Hitchcock and he could break the rules. What does that mean? That doesn't help you as a writer. Well, if you don't, instead of asking what's the rule, ask what's the effect. See, if you follow the rules, and I've seen students do this, they'll follow every rule, and they want me to go like this. Hey, congratulations, you followed the rules. But rules don't applaud you, and they don't pay you. And following them means you're a follower. But if you ask what's the effect of my choice, storytelling choice, on the audience, then that puts me in the power position. I'm the one deciding the effect. And audiences do applaud, and they do pay you. So think about what's the effect of what your choices are. So, for example, with Psycho is a good example of a schema. You just mentioned the schema. If you have a major star, and audiences are used to seeing major stars in movies, and they're used to seeing them all the way through the movie. They may die at the end, but they're used to seeing them all the way through the movie. And the producers who paid a lot of money for that star, they want them all the way through the movie to get their money's worth from it. Then that's what the expectation is going to be. And another thing, we talked about how audiences connect to a main character. Well, you use that as a way in a traditional drama, not like an ensemble, but in a drama, like a traditional drama with a single protagonist, that's where the audience connection is. So you're going to keep them interested because that person's alive. Okay, so you have a lot of powerful things going on. But then if you violate that, if you break that, like Hitchcock did, the question isn't he was bad because he broke a rule. It's how did he get away with that? He didn't have the connection to the main character to sustain audience interest through the movie. So what did he do instead? And what he did, you mentioned, he dwelled, and he did it intentionally. He dwelled for a long time on getting Bates to cover it up. And he really took a long time. They could have just cut away and it's all cleaned up. But he washed it out, and he's cleaning it up, and he's doing this, and he's putting the body in there. And it's now, by that time, we've connected to somebody, and we've connected to a young man who's desperately trying to cover up something his mother did. That's the story. And
is it?
Oh, we think that. It's hard to see it when you know, but you think it. And
of course.
I'll give you one more example of this, of how, the contrast between following rules and going for effect. Okay, let's say you wanted to write a book about how to tell a knock-knock joke, right? What would you do? You would go around and find every knock-knock joke you could find, and you would come to some general conclusions about it, and you would write the book. And you would say, in order to tell a knock-knock joke, you start out by saying knock-knock. The other person will say, who's there? Then you give a partial answer, and then they say partial answer, who, and repeat it back, and then you give the full answer with a twist. And that's how you do it. Those are the rules, okay? So let me try this. Knock-knock.
Who's there?
Control freak. Okay, now here's where you say control freak who. Okay, so
That was
I
good.
just broke that. Right. I just broke the rules, but I didn't. The effect I wanted was a laugh, not the rules. So I relied on the schema of knock knock joke to get the effect I wanted, which was the laugh, rather than to simply deliver another knock knock joke.
That's great.
These are the different.
That's really great.
Thank you. Well, so this is the world that Frank Daniel got me into, which is playing games with the audience, and ultimately strategizing on how to keep the audience wondering what's going to happen next. And if you can do that, if you know how to do that, you can do anything with them in a feature film, and you can pivot into streaming. You can pivot into stage, into one act, 10-minute plays. It doesn't matter. You understand how to grab them and how to keep them. It puts you in a real power position. So we were not taught, like, by page 30 this, by page 60 this, by page 90 this. We weren't really taught that, or we were discouraged from following formula. Actually, the one formula we were told to follow was stories about exciting people told in an exciting way. If you use that formula, you're asking the right questions. What's an exciting character, and what is how do you tell that story in an exciting way? It doesn't mean that you're not going to see the patterns, because often you will. And if you don't have any other resource, I know a really successful, very good writer who learned from Sid Field. Just read the book, and she's done one. And I'm saying I've analyzed the films for the class, and they're like terrific. So it's a tool that can help you. We were just taught in a different world where you're thinking about how it's affecting your audience. And yes, Frank Daniel did the 3-act structure. And I hear people say, well, Sid Field came up with the 3-act structure. There was actually a book that came out the year before Screenplay that espoused the 3-act structure, but it just didn't catch on. I forget what it was called. But Frank Daniel in 79 had been talking about it for years, and of course, you can trace it to Aristotle. It becomes explicit. There's a book called Playmaking by Archer. I forget the guy's first name. Came out in 1912, I think. And he described essentially a 3-act structure. He said plays tend to be 5 acts, but they're really 3, set up, development, resolution. It's been around a while. But as I say, it's really, the way I approach it, it's a tool for getting us into this mode of hope and fear, which is what sustains our interest. And then you go from there. So if you want to use that tool, you use it.
Yeah, right. And it's exactly what you're saying is like, if it works for the outcome that you're trying to achieve, then use it. If you want to use a hammer, or if you want to use an iPhone to get that nail into the wood while you're building the house,
right,
it's your choice. One tool probably will do it better than the other and is less expensive, but whatever works for you, that makes sense for you and what you're trying to achieve, you should use. I'm not sure if that analogy works or not, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to destroy your iPhone, then that's what you use. You use the iPhone. I mean, that's the way. And then you spare that hammer. The hammer you save for other jobs.
Right. Maybe a hammer or a wrench, let's say. A wrench. You could use a wrench to get it in as opposed to a hammer, but the hammer is better prepared to, better built to do that kind of job. So I think all these tools, all these methods, all these techniques that all of these authors and gurus and just teachers from throughout history have thrown on us, that's exactly what they are. They're tools, they're techniques, and they put them in your toolbox, and you bring them out to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah. And there's other tools too that I've talked about with the students that I've noticed filmmakers use to keep us wondering what's going to happen next. And sometimes you can sustain a whole movie with them. Sometimes you really can't. You need the help of other tools. But something like what Frank Daniel used to call advertising. I don't like that term. I use telegraphing. It's essentially telling the audience literally where the film is going. Because a drama, unlike a novel usually there happened in the past. You've got a narrator that tells you what happened. Drama, since Greek times, was something that was about to happen right in front of you. Okay, they've been written in the present tense. They're instructions for actors and set people about what to do for something you're going to create right in front of you, of the audience. And so it's particularly important to keep the audience attention into the future, anticipating. And so you can have something called an appointment. You've seen it used in movies. I'll meet you at Jerry's Juiceteria at 5:00. And then because film is selective, you don't just turn the camera on and run it. You cut to different places. When you arrive at Jerry's Juiceteria, you're not confused about that. You don't know. You know why you're there. So you maintain anticipation, and also you're not coherent. Another one that can be used as a deadline, called a deadline, or a ticking clock. You've got 5 days to bring the Duke back. By midnight Friday, or I'm cooked. You do that, and it's done in Toy Story. From the get-go, these guys knew what they were doing. The original one, it's the move is in a week, right? So we know that we have 1 week that this story is going to take place in a week, and that helps us because we've all, I think, had the experience of being in a movie where you thought it was over, and then it just keeps going. And it keeps going.
That would be the end of Lords of the Rings. They had like 8 endings, and we're just like, "Are you kidding me, Peter? Come on, let's move on."
Right. Yeah, I remember I had a friend. A bunch of us, like we're teenagers, went to the opening of the first one. To get together in the theater, a bunch of colleagues, and one of them had just before the movie started, he got one of these big gulp waters. I said, "You're not going to make it. There's no intermission." I was right. Anyway, the problem is that the filmmaker hasn't signaled properly when the big moment is, because we do emotionally save ourselves for these big moments. And so a deadline can help with that you put a framework around it. The one that example I like to give is, what is that, American Beauty, where it starts out with a guy saying, "In a year I'll be dead." Right. There's a deadline for you. So what it does is it lets the audience relax and not wonder where this is going. You don't want the audience wondering where it's going. You want them to be anticipating. So if you tell them where it's going, right, okay, let's get there. Yeah.
And that's what it's like. So American Beauty is a great example. I love doing this with movies. I did it with my last movie I directed, where I show a scene that's far from inside the movie, closer to the end at the very beginning, to let everybody know, oh hell, this is we're in for a treat. And you're waiting for either there's a meltdown or a murder or something happens, and it's not a surprise that there's a murder. We all know that someone's going to get killed, but who did it? And when are we going to get to that point? And now you're on the ride with them. So I love that technique. We just did Sunset Boulevard with my students. It's a great, the player. If you remember the player, there's so many of those. That technique is so powerful. If you do it properly, you show that little bit of information at the beginning. You're like, what do you mean someone's going to die? And then you're in. So now you're completely connected to these characters. You're like, when am I going to see the tiger come out? This is basically where we've been informed that the tiger is there and he killed somebody. And we're like, where is the tiger? When is the hammer going to drop? And I love that. I love, speaking of suspense, because again, I'm a huge Hitchcock fan, and I've never heard anyone explain suspense better than Hitchcock, which is the bomb underneath the table. Right. Can you tell that story?
Oh yeah, that's the idea, is that you can sustain suspense longer than surprise. The effect of surprise is 15 seconds, I think, and suspense maybe 15 minutes. And the difference would be that if you have two people sitting in a cafe talking, and then a bomb blows up, okay, you had a shock effect. But if you reveal to the audience ahead of time that there's a bomb under the table, then every line of dialogue is imbued with this dramatic irony. And every line of dialogue has a double meaning. When somebody says, "Do you think I should get another coffee?" "Well, I'm not sure." And tick, 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 tick. Suddenly that innocuous line has a huge impact. And that's another one of the tools, is dramatic irony. I have to let my students know, the characters don't have to know everything all the time. You can, reveal things and just not let them see certain things.
But what was the big rule? But what was the big rule that Hitchcock said that you cannot break when doing that technique? Do you remember?
Oh, no. Tell me.
So the technique of the suspense is he did it once in a movie and the audience was very angry at him, which is you show them the bomb and it's ticking, but under no circumstances can that bomb go off and kill the characters. You cannot let that happen, he goes, because the audience will be very angry with you. If you kill them, like surprise, that's fine. But if you you torture them for 15 minutes and then you still kill them, you lose the audience. And I was like, because he did it in one of his early movies. I forgot, it was Foreign Correspondent or something like that, where there was a bomb on the bus. And we knew the bomb was on the bus and it was ticking and it blew up. And everyone was like, no. You can't. There's a contract. There's a contract. Yeah. We have an agreement here. You can't do something like that. So, that's a rule that I haven't seen broken very often. I mean, in a suspenseful situation, in that specific scenario, you can't blow up the characters. You just can't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I'll remember that because, I happen to have a script right now that I'm working on where I kill those characters. I'm going to change that.
Change it right away. Mr. Hitchcock said no. And I'm going to ask you a few questions because I could keep talking to you, Paul, for about another 2 or 3 hours. But I know you're a busy man. You've got fresh minds. You have fresh minds to teach. So I want to.
But I wanted to say one more thing about the deadline thing. There are a couple of movies that I've seen that sustain the audience interest in those. Primarily through that purpose, through that means. One of them was The Hurt Locker. That's a huge. I don't know if you saw that, but it's a countdown. So the screenwriter there he seems to be able to write these micro realistic scenes, very vivid. But it freed him to just explore these different situations. As long as we're reminded once in a while that we're ticking down to day 0, then we know it's going somewhere. So we
like High Noon eventually, yeah.
High Noon is another one. 500 Days of Summer didn't go exactly in order, but eventually, when you get to 499, the movie's almost over. Or Julia and Juliet. There was a different recipe every day. When you get to recipe 350, we're close to being at the end. So you can do that to frame things, and then it frees you to explore other kinds of drama. Anyway, okay.
It's a kind of roadmap for the audience. Like at the end, like at 12 o'clock, all hell's going to break loose. At 365 recipes, we're pretty much going to be close to the end of this thing. So it's kind of
get the chocolate cake by that point. The really rich frosting.
But perfect. So perfect example with Julia, which I love that movie, by the way. Imagine if you've made that agreement with the audience at the beginning, and at the day 365, she's like, there's another book I'm going to do, and you go on another, and that's like, right. And she's just like, I want to do another blog, and I'm just gonna, and the movie keeps going. Can you imagine that movie would be horrible? You'd be like, no, there was an agreement here. Yeah. You can break that agreement here and there, but you've got to be careful with how you do it. You know what I mean? I mean, but I was just thinking of how horrible that movie would be. After, let's say High Noon. At noon, they're like, 4 o'clock. We're just, they're a
little bit late, right?
We did a shootout here, but there's 3 other guys coming at 4, so we're just gonna keep going. Like you can't, right? Especially if the movie. Promise.
You've got to keep that promise, or people will turn on you. And,
without question. So I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests, and one specific to you that I've never asked before on the show, and I'm going to start asking all of my guests. What are 3 screenplays every screenwriter should read?
3 screenplays that every screenwriter should read. Boy, that's. You know what? I so closely identify the screenplay with the movie, but the style of. I consider Billy Wilder like the guy who could. Any of his movies is like a textbook on how to write a screenplay. But the screenplays that he was writing were done. They were called continuities, and their style was very different. Or Preston Sturges.
I love Preston Sturges.
Yeah, if you're going to read a screenplay and really enjoy it, any of the Preston Sturges comedies from the early '40s will get you there. And
Sullivan's Travels. Oh, Sullivan's Travels. Yeah. Oh, so good.
Right. But just be prepared that it's not going to be in the master scene format. It's going to be in the continuity with the sequences marked, sequences A through whatever they were doing. Okay, the screenplays that I've loved. There's one screenplay, one of my favorite movies, is called Trouble in Paradise.
Mm-hmm. I remember that movie.
1932, the first talky romantic comedy, and arguably still the best one. And it's in a book called Three Screen Comedies by Samson Raphaelson. So you can actually get that book and read that. And I happened to read that script before I saw the movie, because the movie was, this is when I was young, we didn't have VHS. We couldn't get the movie. It was tied up somewhere, so I had to read the script. But that script was so, you got to see this. Any student of film should see this movie. It was one of these, and this is one of my pet peeves about a lot of films I see nowadays. It's about how the third act is like usually too predictable, because there's a misunderstanding of what the third act is. But that's another podcast. But in this one, for example, is that I'm reading this and I'm turning the pages of this comedy, and I have no idea how they're going to solve this problem.
That's the best.
Everything is, it's like all these different elements are coming into play. It's like, no, there is no way for this guy to get out of here. It's not even, can he run faster or jump higher? It's like, running faster, jumping, that's not going to even help him here. He's like trapped. Anyway, so that's one of Raphaelson's, Billy Wilder, Double Indemnity is a terrific one, because you can learn about indirection in the dialogue, what a lot of people call subtext. I use a slightly different term, but how the characters are speaking metaphorically, so they don't have to reveal what they're really talking about.
Is there any movies in the last, let's say 20 years, in the 2000s, that screenplay you're like, man, you've got to read this?
I don't know if I've seen some really good movies, but the scripts I've read, recent movies that not even recent anymore, which kind of breaks the rules a little bit, is In Bruges.
Yeah, I love that movie.
And I like to show that after I show a classic like Toy Story. I mean, I've read the script. It's a great script to read, but I think it's a conforming script. It's one that they wrote after animation is a little different. When they get to the end, then they write the script that maybe the stars are going to actually read, because it's synced up to that thing. But that's all right. That's 24 years ago now. It's not within the 2000s.
Fair enough. I don't want to put you on the spot. It's fine.
But I've read, the In Bruges is very literate. I liked it. But I'd say the script was flawed compared to the movie, because the ending.
It's always interesting. It's always interesting. Sometimes the script is so much better than the movie, and sometimes the movie is so much better than the script.
Right. He definitely cut some things out of there, just like, well, everybody does. I mean, I don't even know if you know Sunset Boulevard, there was an opening there that was cut out.
Wow.
Because did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it starts out in a morgue with him talking to the other dead bodies, all explaining, well, how'd you get here? Well, I'll tell you my story. And when they test screened it, they shot it. When they test screened it, they found out that people were laughing too hard, and then they didn't know how to take the rest of the movie. They thought it was straight up comedy.
Well, I mean, it's a two body talking to other bodies. Yeah, I mean,
right. What are you going to do? So that you can read the script. I think, no, I never got to read that version of the script. But anyway, In Bruges is very literate. That's a good script to read, I think. That's
plenty of good ones. That's plenty of homework for everybody.
Okay.
Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to break into the business today?
Yeah, well, that is probably going to sound familiar to you and the other guests, but obviously reading screenplays, you asked about reading screenplays. I haven't read that many lately, but when I was younger, when I was learning, that's what you do. You have to read the screenplays and find out how they read and what, how things are expressed. So you read a lot of those, and then you write them, and you just keep writing. And I am of the persuasion that you write what you're really passionate about without concern about marketability. I mean, yes, you want it to connect with people, but there's another teacher I've heard interviewed named, he talks about the pitch perfect authentic script. That's the term he uses. I think it's a great term. The pitch perfect authentic script. That's the one that's very unique. That is really your original voice. that connects with people. That don't be afraid of that. Write the things that are really exciting to you. So doing that, and then this theme and history that's opened up. You're talking about. I'm encouraging the screenwriters to take initiative and make their stuff. Make
Fair
it.
enough. Yeah, and nowadays you can definitely have the power to do so.
If you wanted to do it in 1965, you had to shoot 16 millimeter black and white, sync sound, and pray. And now you could shoot something that they can't really tell isn't done with $1 million. And you make it look good. Now you can. Don't worry about the gatekeepers. Do it, and you are going to learn. And I'm doing a class now, experimental class, where the students were all writing quibbies. The Quibi thing with we're doing 5 to 7 minutes. They're doing 7 to 15 minutes. But each student writes 7 minutes of a continuing story that we're trying to hook the audience in, and then we shoot it in January and see if it plays. And get them. My hope is that eventually develop it in a way that students leave film school with a credit on something that people maybe have seen. Wow. There's no reason. You can. Right now, the model of film school is make a short film, send it to festivals, and pray. Because there hasn't been a market for short films in 100 years. It went out in the teens when we went into features and serials. The original serials were actually what we call quibbies now. They're about 15, 20-minute episodes. And that's what we're going back to that.
All right.
They can do that and have something marketable. Anyway, that's a suggestion would be, if you're not in film school, you could still do these things. And I think get recognized that way. And draw attention to yourself. And I do think there's a great many opportunities now than there ever was. So.
What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Oh, okay. So I've been giving that some thought. Without trying to sound mysterious, it's understanding that you can be living two lives: the one you think you're living and the one you're in. That you.
Very much.
Sometimes you learn this lesson that something you thought you knew you didn't really know, and that you have to reassess how you understand things. And yeah.
Perfect. Now, what did you learn from your biggest failure?
Learn from my biggest... Oh, I'd like to tell you, I've had plenty of those. So, I mean, this is a rich experience you're talking about.
Fair. Same here, sir.
I like... Well, you've heard of the Duke of Wellington, the guy that beat Napoleon? He has a quote that I like to use frequently. It's, he wasn't always a winner. He had this disastrous campaign in Spain a few years before. He beat Napoleon at Waterloo. And he commented on it. He said, well, I learned what not to do, and that's always something. And the biggest lesson that I've learned from you said from a failure?
Yeah, what did you learn from your biggest failure?
What I learned from my biggest failure. I guess the biggest thing would be to relax and focus on what you really want to make and do that. Because I remember the experience was that out of film school, I developed a thesis screenplay, and it actually got recognition, and it got me a William Morris agent. And I was like, this is really great. I'm on my way. But then when that didn't sell, it was like, okay, what's the next project? And suddenly I was in a different world because I felt like they were watching me, and I was trying to create under these circumstances of desperately, and it changed my process. I didn't know enough to just say, whatever, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you'll like it or not. So that was a failure. That was an opportunity that was missed, and it was because of that.
Now, what was the fear that you had to overcome to write your first screenplay? What was that big fear that you had to overcome?
Oh, the biggest fear to overcome when I was writing that first screenplay, I suppose whether I had enough story. Remember, I was under the guidance of a master screenwriter who is, Frank Daniel was not only a teacher, he did produce and write a lot of films in Czechoslovakia and won Academy Award for Shop on Main Street, 1965, as a producer in that case. So he actually knew the process inside and outside. So I had that guide, but still, when I was just trying to get ideas together about how I'm going to do this, what is there enough story there? I suppose that might have been it.
Okay.
So,
and 3 of your favorite films of all time.
That one, that kind of changes. Depends
every
on
day.
What age I am, but I would certainly put Trouble in Paradise up there. If defining it as a movie, put it on. I'll watch it again. That kind of movie. I certainly. What else? There's so many amazing ones. I really think, from the point of view of pure craftsmanship, the first Toy Story is a remarkable accomplishment. I was actually invited to give a lecture at Disney Animation a little while ago, and guess what? I used that movie. I said, I don't know what process they used to work this, but here, I'm going to show you what they were doing. And it's just in 80 minutes, the stuff that they did. What else have I love Lawrence of Arabia. That's another textbook of screenwriting.
Of cinema in general.
Of cinema, period. I guess that dates me. A little older films, but those are probably...
Those are 3. Those are 3 good ones.
Yeah.
Those are 3 good ones. They've been on the show before, so it's except for Trouble in Paradise, I think it's the first time that's been on the show. So, but you have very good choices.
Well, that one, I got to tell you, Trouble in Paradise, written by a guy named Samson Rayfieldson. I had a chance when I was in college to take a class with him. Believe it or not. He was 80 years old when he would teach in that class. He would come in with his wife. He was hard of hearing, and she would help him a little bit. And the first class, he told us, don't think that you're going to, get any industry contacts from me because everyone I know is dead.
Great line. Oh, that's a great line.
Right.
I plan to use that in about 40 years, 40 or 50 years.
You must save that one.
Now, where can people find you and find out about your work and the books you've written?
Well, the first book I had, which seems to have had legs, it came out 15 years ago, but it's called Screenwriting: The Sequence Approach. Okay. And we haven't talked much about that, but it's a technique that I learned from Frank Danielle. That one is available. Then the new one is called The Science of Screenwriting by Connie Shears and me. And then my website is called writesequence.com.
Okay.
And all one word, and that's if people want to learn more. So that's
Paul, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, my friend. Thank you so much. You have dropped multiple knowledge bombs today, sir.
Okay, those knowledge bombs are coming, but they're peaceful, right? They're positive bombs.
They're positive bombs. They're very positive, good information bombs. So thanks again for being on the show, my friend. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.